Welcome to another dimension, a dimension of insight, a dimension of understanding. You're entering the place where reality collides with truth. There are no limit, there are no boundary. This is Off Planet Radio.
Welcome to Off Planet Radio. I'm Randy Moggins. It seems like the times right now call for us to kind of listen to what I guess the Spirit is saying to us. I've been kind of down a path for a number of years, and I've talked about it on these shows from time to time, but I haven't really pursued the subject matter a whole lot. But we're going to talk about the Archons. I have a sense right now that a lot of things are being unveiled as we go into this really deep, dark time that we're living in the world. And the more understanding we get about the subject matter, the more effective we're going to be in terms of being able to stand up and begin to combat what is basically the enemies of mankind. I want to read a quote. Long ago, the native sorcerer shamans of Mexico discovered that we have a companion for life. We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our lord and master. It has rendered us docile, helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so. And that quote comes from a book called The Active Side of Infinity by Carlos Castaneda, and it frames the conversation that we're about to have with our guest today, who has actively been researching and experiencing the effects and the presence of these beings, both light and dark, interacting with humanity. We welcome Robert Stanley. His website is unicusmagazine.com. And Robert, welcome to Off Planet Radio.
Hey, thanks for having me, Randy.
It's good to have you on. Several weeks ago, we got in contact with each other. I connected with you specifically to discuss the subject of what we call the Archons. For listeners who don't know who you are, maybe you can give us a little bit of the background. You're a UFO investigator as well, having covered the flyovers of UFOs over Washington, D.C. So kind of frame this a little bit with your background and how you got into this particular subject.
Okay, well, it wasn't like I was looking for it, honestly. I really don't consider myself a UFO investigator. I'm more of a journalist in general. The reason I started investigating UFOs at all was because they were investigating me. And that's the honest truth. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think that's how we all stumble into this in some circuitous way.
I guess. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone. But I mean, for myself, it started out in Malibu, and of course that seems to be now on everybody's radar. But at the time when I was living there back 60s, 70s, and 80s, people were having a lot of weird close encounters, and I was one of them. Oftentimes I was not alone. I do have some pictures of that, and I was just very curious about who these people were, why they were so covert in the way that they were interacting with people, like at arm's length,
Yeah.
But I guess we should really start at the beginning, obviously, is the reason that things really got interesting for me when I was 25 years old. In 1985, yes, I was 25 years old. It was the fall equinox, September 21st, 1985, when I first encountered or became aware of the Archons. And that was while I was working security at a beach in Malibu, and very prestigious. I mean, all the mucky-muck people of the elite of Hollywood lived there, and I just, it was just a job for me, but it was intriguing, to say the least. Anyway, I met a boy there who was possessed by these things, and he damn near died. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I can say with some degree of certainty that if I hadn't intervened, I'm pretty sure he would have bled to death. And it was just one of those weird moments. Okay. Anyway, as I was doing that for this family, and by the way, it wasn't part of my job. It was just an instinct. It was a reflex. I couldn't, I don't know. I didn't.
Can you give me a little bit more of the picture of what was happening?
I've talked about this so many times. Okay, let me.
I know.
Here's how this goes. All right. If you really want the whole story, I'll be fair to people who've never heard this before. It was a absolutely gorgeous day at the beach, and it wasn't too crowded for me because I did crowd control. That's what I was doing there. For the homeowners, they really didn't want people sitting on their private property, and there was legal issues. If they didn't maintain their property, at some point, the whole beach could have been considered a public easement.
Right.
And so that's what I was doing. At the time, though, I had just got back from surfing because I had some downtime, and that happened infrequently, and it was always wonderful. So I got out of the water, and I put the surfboard back at the house near where I was stationed as a security guard. And I was walking away from the house, and there was a young boy. I think he was around 9 or 10, and he was sitting there playing in the sand by himself, and he didn't look very happy. Is the first thing I noticed about him. And then I looked at him and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And he didn't look at me, and he kind of mumbled something like, "Yeah, whatever." He just didn't seem happy. And then I realized, I looked at a little closer, I could see there was a big scar on his forehead, and I didn't want to bother him. It was none of my business. But as I walked away from him, I'm thinking, man, however he got that big scar on his forehead, that must have hurt. Maybe he's like, suffering. Yeah. He could have like head trauma or something from that scar. But I didn't think anything of it. So I walked over very nearby, walked, a couple doors down, sat down. I'm starting to warm up because the water's pretty cold out in Malibu, actually, even in the summertime. So I was starting to warm up, and I was really feeling very good. I mean, it was the juxtaposition. The reason I'm telling you is because it was so stark that I had this feeling just before all hell literally break loose around me. I had a feeling of how good it felt to be alive at that moment in that place. Mm-hmm. And as I was sitting there, there was a most unusual sound, and what it was is that boy had gone upstairs to the second floor of the house, and he ran across the living room full speed into a sliding glass door and broke it with his face. And the sound of that, I don't think it was safety glass because it shattered the whole thing. I mean, it shattered in very large pieces, so it had a ringing tone to it, like almost like a bell. Right. But it was horrific too, because at the sound, I don't know, big sheets of glass, they have a certain sound to them. Anyway, I turned my head. It was just a reflex. I turned my head towards that sound, and I saw the boy raise his hands to his face, and then there was a shadowy figure of a man came up behind him and clutched him up, and that all happened in just like, a second, not even a second. But the other thing I remember really clearly, Randy, was that the time slowed down for some reason, and I had no control over this. When it happened, from my perspective, time slowed down. Mm-hmm.
Time compression.
I guess this is fairly common in traumatic events.
Yes. But
like I said, at that point, I didn't know what was going on. I was just reacting. And as soon as I saw that happening, I found myself, I jumped out of my chair and sprinted to the house as fast as I could. Like I said, it wasn't far away, and I was actually in very good shape at that time because I used to run on the beach and surf. So I was in the house in no time, and I opened the door. I didn't even knock. I just opened the door as fast as I could, and I yelled, "Security, security," and nobody answered. I ran up the stairs, and there was the grandmother. She was standing there, as white as a sheet. And there's blood and glass everywhere. And I'm thinking, okay, so where's the kid? But then I said to her, has anybody called the paramedics? and she didn't respond to me. So I went over and found the phone, because I knew the people that owned the property. These people were just, I don't know, renting or friends, whatever. And I called. I forget if I called ambulance. What was it? Whatever it was. I got somebody on the phone. I said, "There's somebody's bleeding to death. You got to send the paramedics right now." And so they did. And whatever, minutes later they showed up and began the treating him in the vehicle on the way to the hospital. Because you got to understand, Malibu doesn't have any hospitals. It's weird like that. There's no cemeteries, no hospitals. It's just kind of, and it's also very isolated. A lot of times when people get into life-threatening situations, they are medevaced out by helicopter.
Right.
In this case, it didn't happen like that for whatever reason. So I don't know how far he had to drive to get, but at least I know when they showed up, they immediately, because, the grandmother, I started talking to the grandmother. She says, she told me that her husband, the grandfather, was actually had the boy in the bedroom in the back, and he was holding a towel over his face. Well, I can understand why he would do that, but I mean, that would not have saved his life. I mean, it may have prolonged a little bit, but I don't know if you've ever cut your scalp.
Yes.
Okay. It bleeds really profusely.
Yeah, I actually put my face through a windshield in a car accident one time.
Jesus. Yes. Okay, so you know this intimately. All right. So anyway, so I realized that she was still in a state of shock and there was glass everywhere. So I just sort of helped myself to some tools and I started cleaning up. And as I was doing that, I was sort of trying to talk to her because I could see how freaked out she was. And I said, at some point, "Excuse me, it's none of my business, but I noticed he already had a scar on his forehead." And she said, "Yeah, last year he jumped out of his father's pickup truck, the bed of the pickup truck. This is while I was parked. He was playing with the cat in the back of the pickup truck, and he jumped out. The cat jumped out, then he jumped out after the cat and hit his face first. He jumped out head first like Superman, went face first into a trailer hitch and busted his forehead. Literally. I mean, it was a huge scar. I figured, you don't get, that's not like a scratch. That was bad. And, okay, well, that was bad. But she says to me, I didn't even ask her this. She says, "It's a good thing the door was shut. Otherwise, this could have been a lot worse." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, she said, I think he was going to jump over the railing, head first, like he did out of the pickup truck." And she says, "For some reason, I think he thinks he can fly." And at that moment, I was in a very weird state of mind. Like I said, everything had kind of gone back to normal. After I ran over there, that was the other thing. It slowed down and then it sort of sped up as I ran. I don't know what was going on, what that mechanism is in us, but it's very, very weird feeling.
We're creating our own time states. That's like what I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was very brief, but it was extremely dramatic the way it happened. Anyway, I didn't have any control of that, but I'm in the house, I'm talking to her, cleaning up this mess, and she tells me that, and I got the weirdest goosebumps on my arm, because at that moment I had a realization, and I don't know where it came from, that there was a voice telling him that he could fly, and when I had that thought, this was completely instinctual. I looked up and I could see these things. I believe this was with my third eye. I mean, I don't really think I saw it with my regular vision, but somehow I managed to see these things that were in the air at the top of the ceiling. The only thing I could say that they kind of resembled was ticks, because that's at the time, growing up in Malibu, there's a lot of ticks out there.
Right, yeah. So
they so again, instinctually, I knew they were like parasites. I didn't realize that those things are even capable of manipulating that boy and his grandparents in that fashion. At the time, I had no idea. However, once I saw them, and I had that awareness, and I had broken up their feeding frenzy. Mm-hmm. They started attacking me. Okay, I only saw them for a brief moment, but it was enough for me to like really wonder what in the hell was going on. As if things weren't weird enough. I mean, it went from strange to stranger in a very quick moment. I mean, I tell people it was like being thrown in the deep end of the demon pool. It was sink or swim, honestly. So, I didn't stay very long there. Obviously, I didn't, my job was done there. Like I said, that really wasn't my job, but, I walked out of there and I felt really weird. I felt like, obviously the adrenaline there's a lot of adrenaline got through my body, but there was these things, I couldn't get them out of my mind. And I felt like, to me, that they were, attacking my solar plexus. And it was just bizarre. I mean, it's like, when you're really stressed out, sometimes you get a knot in your stomach.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Except there was, as far as I could tell, I mean, there was no reason for me to be that stressed out and, or feeling like that, other than the fact that, I was right in the middle of this bizarre event. And, the thing is, looking back on it, I know quite a few people who have committed suicide in Malibu. I mean, these are people I grew up with. Okay. And so, like I said, in hindsight, a lot of things make sense. At the time, it didn't make any sense at all. So what I did was, after work, I went over to my next door neighbor's house. He was somewhat of a mentor for me. And he was a paraplegic guy. Mm-hmm. He'd actually been quadriplegic for a while, and he was in a terrible car accident. And the thing about him is he told me he had a spirit body he could go walking around in, and I fully believed him because I'd seen him in my dream. I remember almost every time I saw him in my dreams, it freaked me out because he'd be walking, and he told me, he says, don't tell anybody. That's just our secret. It's like, we all have a spirit body, and I'm like, really? Okay, whatever. So I told him what happened down at the beach and how it was, and I didn't know what to do. And he said, well, tonight's the equinox. He says, go up to the mountain and watch the sunset, and, you'll have a vision. I was like, okay, yeah, it's at that point, anything seemed better than just sitting around, because I felt so uncomfortable. And, so I did. I went up there, and, I wasn't planning on spending the night, but I actually spent the entire night up there by myself, with no food or water. And, so I rode my motorcycle to this spot. I don't know. It was just, like I said, I was running on instinct. And, I got there well before sunset. And it was one of those nights, this doesn't happen very often, but the full moon was coming up as the sun was setting. And I literally was sitting in the middle between the two of these astronomical bodies, which was a very interesting feeling. And so I began trying different things, and including, all this was so spontaneous. I actually tilted my head back. I could see out of one eye, I could see the sun, and the other eye, I could see the moon. That was a weird feeling. Kind of hard to do, but I managed to do that. And I followed my mentor's instructions. I did watch the sun as it was melting into the sea. It's a safe time to do that if you really want to stare into the sun, trying to connect with that energy through your, right? Because if you look at somebody doing that, it's really kind of weird. But if you look at somebody who's doing that, their eyes, their pupils are actually the color of the sun. It's kind of a weird thing. But
interesting.
Anyway,
that was not an observation I've ever made.
Well, because normally you wouldn't be standing in front of it, but I realized it later that that's what my eyes must have looked like because I was wide open and staring into the sun. But anyway, it has a correlation because I started to sit on the ground and meditate as though my life depended on it, because I was still under attack by these things. I could just feel them. And I've been stung by jellyfish and bees and ticks and, you name it, mosquitoes. Nothing felt like what these things were doing to me. And there was clearly more than one of them. It was a swarm of them. And so as it got darker, I started to, I decided I would try a technique in Kriya Yoga where you begin chanting Om. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I was doing it in such a way that I pushed my tongue up against the roof of my mouth as I was saying it.
Right.
And I was sitting, firmly on the ground, and I could feel the energy going through from the earth through my spine. And as I was saying this resonant Om, over and over again, really just putting some effort into that, I could feel my head. I could literally feel a resonant energy going out, like overtones coming out the top of my skull.
Yeah. I've experienced this before too. Yeah.
It was really, like I said, I didn't plan this out. It just was, it was happening. And I mean, yes, I could have not done it, but it was like I was just trying things. And I've realized that, sort of like a message in a bottle, that this beam this frequency that I was broadcasting could be picked up by something or someone further out there, because it was getting dark and I could see the Milky Way starting to form, or I should say an arm of, where we're at in the galaxy. And so I figured, I will broadcast on this frequency, sort of like we're doing now. And the only thing that I was broadcasting was one thought, was love. Because what I had experienced with that boy and his grandparents, to me, that was the utter opposite of love, creativity, and et cetera. That was just evil. You don't do something like that to anybody. I mean, why would you? Right. So I did that. I don't know. I usually don't wear a watch. And I'm not sure exactly what time it was, but I know that the moon was, let's just say if it was the sun, it would have been a little past midday, as far as the position of the moon. And I was starting to get pretty tired. And so I laid down on there were some cement structures there that were left over from an old Nike installation they had, because this was very near to Point Mugu Naval Base. And back in the day when they were using all the Nike surface-to-air missiles, anti-missile defense. Yeah, I was laying on these ruins from the military and on the cement, and I laid down on cement, and I'm not kidding. In a matter of moments, it felt like I was floating, and I didn't resist it at all. I just floated right out of my body, or at least some part of me disconnected from my body. And I floated into a dimension of light, which a lot of people out of body, if you read any of the out of body experiences or near death experiences, they're all very similar in that regard. When you really disconnect, you end up in you end up in this other dimension. So I wasn't there for more than felt like just a few moments. And you got to understand, I wasn't asleep. I really need to stress this, that I was not asleep, and I certainly was not dreaming, because I wasn't even asleep yet. But I was fully aware of what was happening to me. And as I was in the light, I realized I was safe. So I guess you could say mission accomplished there. Mm-hmm. But then I saw something moving, and it was coming towards me, which of course that got all my attention. And as it got closer, I realized it was actually a person, but I wasn't expecting this. Again, everything about this experience is just utterly shocking, and still to this day, it floors me. The person that came up to me looked like Christ. I'm not saying it was. In fact, he didn't even say he was. When I looked at him, he had long hair and a beard and some sort of robe, but his eyes were glowing. He was glowing brighter than the light we were in, and his eyes there was a light coming out of his eyes. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, whoa, who is that? And I believe he said to me, I am the Father. He either said, I am the Father, or he might have said, I am your Father. It's hard for me to remember, because I was so shocked, not only by his appearance, but the fact that, what do you mean? You're the Father of what? I mean, I was 25 at the time. Yes, I'd studied some religious material, but I'm not I'm not devoutly religious. I just, this to me, it really didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I guess my state of confusion, he thought that was funny. And not in a sinister way at all, but he started laughing. And that's the last thing. I mean, the next thing I know, I'm sitting bolt upright, and I'm like going, what in the heck was that all about? I guess I got my vision, right? You know? But then the next shocking thing for me was I realized I looked, and now the moon was setting on the horizon. And I thought, well, wait a second.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Did I fall asleep? I couldn't have been asleep. I wasn't asleep. I just laid down, and then this, and then now I'm awake. What happened? I mean, that didn't make any sense. I've never had an experience like that. Some people have tried to say it was missing time or whatever. I don't think so. I think in fact, I know I went somewhere because people saw me. This thing is so bizarre, man. I can't, like I said, I almost hesitate to tell people this because it just doesn't sound like I'm sane when I tell it, but this is what happened. Okay. So I'm standing there. Now I'm standing there talking to myself, wondering what happened. I couldn't lay back down now because I'm thinking, this is not right. This is crazy. I mean, but I also knew I wasn't being attacked anymore, which, okay, I was grateful for that. But now I'm completely confused. I'm like, who was that guy? And how come I can't remember where I've been for the past or what happened? I knew something had happened in all those hours that I was out of my body. Yeah. It was a complete blank. And I'm like, so I'm literally walking around in circles going, this is crazy. This is nuts. I don't get this at all. And so I waited for the sun to rise. And remember what I told you when I got there? The sun was setting, the moon was rising?
Right.
Well, now the opposite thing was happening. And here I am still in the middle of it. Okay. And you know, I would not have been up there for that event, that energy exchange like that, unless I had been attacked. I would have not been meditating like that on a mountain by myself all night long until I literally left my body, unless I'd been attacked. So that was an unintended I don't think that these things, when they started attacking me, I don't think that was their goal. Okay. But that was the consequence of it all. Once the sun had come up sufficiently, I felt safe enough to ride back down because I was still pretty tired. And I was really shook up too. I mean, I was so utterly perplexed by all of this stuff, that I got on my motorcycle and I ride back down to the beach, and, I'm sitting there trying to figure this out, and I had this feeling like I better go check on what happened to this boy, because last time I saw him, he was in terrible shape. I mean, for all I know, he could have died on the way to the hospital. Yeah. I just didn't, not that again, it's not my business, but I just had this really, really strong, sense that I needed to do that. Okay. So, I walked over to the house. I knocked on the door. Again, no answer. So I quietly opened the door and I said, hello, is anybody here? And then I saw the grandparents came to the top of the stairs, and I said, hi, I just wanted to see, is your grandson okay? And they said, yeah, he's going to live. He lost a lot of blood. And they said he had to have over 300 stitches in his face. Oh. I'm like, Jesus. And then as it, it doesn't, I'm hearing myself saying this, and I can't even believe it. I said, I know this is going to sound strange, but unless you heal the scars on his soul. Oh, no, I said, you can heal the scars on his face, but unless you heal the scars on his soul, this will happen again. And I was like, oh my God, what did I just say? Well, and then I just walked out of there going, oh God, I'm going to get fired. They're going to think I flipped my lid. And honestly, I felt like I was going nuts. I really did. I thought I was going a little crazy.
Well, do you not think that was actually what you were supposed to do? That was the download that you got?
I kind of, okay, I can't prove it, but I have a feeling I must have checked in on him when I was in that other state of being. I can't, I don't, again, that's been blocked. And I found that other people who have near-death experiences describe the same thing, where they see things in vivid detail, but other things they're literally told, look, we're going to have to, sorry, but you can't have a clear memory when you go back, because this would just be harmful to you. Again, a lot of research had to go into understanding this. It's been like a lifelong quest, actually. Okay. I was feeling very weird when I left that house, and I had no intention of going back there for that reason. I go over to where I was stationed, and I'm sitting there trying to figure things out, and this girl comes up to me. She was a friend of my girlfriend at the time. She was very excited. She says, "Robert, I saw you in my dreams last night." And I'm like, okay, what so? And she's, you taught me how to fly. I'm like, I did? And she says, yeah, you came into my bedroom and you took me up to the mountains. And I'm like, what? What? Yeah, you took me up to the mountains and you taught me how to fly. Really? Okay. And she says, yeah, and we were up there for a while, and you were getting frustrated with me because I just wasn't getting it. So you put me in a shopping cart and started pushing me back down the hill. And then she says, I didn't like that. So I jumped out, and then suddenly I found myself flying. And she says, you flew right next to me, and you made sure that I got back home. She says it was kind of like Peter Pan. I'm like, really?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you were painting that picture.
It's crazy, though. If it had just stopped there, I would have like gone, oh, okay, because I hadn't told her anything, and I wasn't going to tell anybody anything, but she was telling me, specifically, we went up to the mountains last night. I'm like, wow, that's a pretty weird coincidence if she just got that just out of the blue, because she wasn't, look, this person, nice lady, but she was like not into this stuff at all. She was a typical Valley girl that liked to smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol and drive cars and go to the mall. I mean, it was just like, this was not on her radar. And for her she actually said to me, she says, I think this has something to do with spirituality. I read about this in my psych class once. And I'm looking at her going, oh God, this is just getting crazier by the minute. So, I didn't tell her what happened, because how could I? I didn't even understand what was happening. But after I got off work that day, later, I went home, and the phone's ringing, and I picked it up. It was my grandmother, total opposite person, very spiritual woman. And she says, Robbie, I saw you in my dreams last night. I'm like, oh God, I hope I didn't take my grandmother flying. I was thinking, oh Jesus, because she could barely walk, and let alone I'm going to take her flying to the mountain. So she says, you were standing at the foot of my bed, and you were saying something to me, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it was, because she says, you had lights all around you like a Christmas tree. She said, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I just had to call and tell you that. And I'm like, I was so shocked. I'm like, okay, Granny, thanks. I got to go. I'm tired. I was just like, this now there, if I was drowning in the deep end of a demon pool, that was my life preserver. Those two women witnessing to me what they had experienced with me in another dimension of being was just enough to keep me from really going crazy or thinking that I had lost my mind or was losing my mind, So I had to pay attention to what was going on. The next thing that happened, more or less, was I ended up going back to the mountains, hoping that I would somehow meet this being of light and maybe ask him some questions. And what did I find was these ancient ruins or statues, huge megalithic statues up in the mountains there of a dormant, extinct volcano. And the shock of my life, though, was when I was there, I recognized this place. I remembered that I had actually dreamed about multiple times when I was a kid. I used to have lucid dreams about going there, and it was still intact at the time, or at least the way I saw it in that other state of being. It was a temple, or more like a university. It was a school. It was a place of learning, of higher knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then I kept going back there, and I would bring people with me, and especially during the 80s, early 90s, we were having multiple close encounters right there at night, usually at night, right above Point Mugu. And now everybody knows about it because of those Google Earth images of what, some people are calling it a UFO base. I don't really know if it is. I don't really think they need a base. I think what they use is portals, wormholes,
right.
stargates, whatever you want to call them. They're coming from another world altogether, but it's not like they have to travel.
Right, but it does seem that they have a certain connection to certain geophysical locations, what
Absolutely.
we might call vortex. So go ahead, run with that.
Well, that's what a stargate is. It's a vortex. But the question is, are these natural? Are they artificial? Or there's a combination of both? It's hard to say. But look, I mean, I've come to understand through my research and my own experiences that these portals do exist. They're like windows to other worlds. And I don't mean just peeking in. You literally can go to and from these other worlds. And whoever set that up that's amazing. It's truly, truly miraculous. Okay. But, the sequence of events do seem to me as though they were staged, not for my benefit, but as part of a process.
An awakening.
Not just for me.
Right.
What I've found is the only reason I actually came out with this as publicly as I have in the last few years is because of this common enemy, as you put it earlier, was that these parasites that the Gnostics called the archons or lords, the evil overlord of mankind. It took me. Actually, I was puzzling over this for years. I mean, decades, actually, trying to put it into some kind of context. And it wasn't till, I finished my second book, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., and I was starting to finally realize that these things really are among us. They're not just isolated to certain areas. Like, I was always concerned that maybe they weren't just there in Malibu causing people to commit suicide. But when I was researching, for years, I researched the UFO and alien activity in Washington, D.C. And in the conclusion of the second book, I had come across the true accounts of what later became known as the book, The Exorcist. Of course, was made into a movie.
Yes.
But that was taken right out of the newspapers. I know people like to dismiss it as, oh, no, that was all a big misunderstanding. But it's not. There are way too many incidences of this happening through time in our history. And most recently, we would call these people schizophrenics. But people do hear the voices. Sometimes it's more than just hearing the voices, but they're very manipulative. And yes, they're called different things in different cultures at different times, but their method of operation is always the same. It's very covert, highly manipulative, always destructive in the sense that they are encouraging people to harm themselves or others. And in the process, what I've learned is that our bodies actually emit a type of a darker energy that these things can feed off of. It's my understanding. I could be wrong, but this is really where I've come to a conclusion, was that they're not even from our universe. I believe that they came here, they hitched a ride from some of our ancestors who traveled through a wormhole out of this universe into a forbidden zone. And when they came back, they had gone insane. They were now no longer peaceful and harmonious with their own kind. They had literally turned against their own kind, and they started destroying whole civilizations and whole planets. And enslaving those that they didn't destroy. And ultimately, that's what they did to this solar system and this planet Earth. And it's fairly recent, too. I mean, in a galactic scale, or I should say on the bigger picture of the cosmos, this particular universe, this is all relatively new, my understanding. And here's the other thing, Randy, I got to tell you, not only was I confused about all this, I couldn't figure it out. I tried and tried and tried until I actually mentally made a connection with that being of light, the Father, whoever he is, or whatever he may really represent. I asked him to give me clarity, and you never know with these things. I know that they can hear our thoughts. That's been just demonstrated to me.
Oh, yeah,
for
definitely.
Sure. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I think that's a natural state that's been denied us over time when they turned this, when the fallen ones, the archons, let me be more specific. Because I don't want to confuse people. I'm sorry I jump around, but these mental parasites infect the minds of not only humans but certain extraterrestrials, human and humanoid. Not everyone is infected, thank God, but the ones who are infected wreak havoc wherever they go, and that causes a lot of issues for people even who are not infected. So. One of the things was I started to get messages, guidance from not just the Father, but the whole hierarchy of the angelic beings, or whatever you want to call them. All right,
I'm comfortable with the terminology. It kind of slips and slides, but I think that's a common way to term it, Robert.
Okay, but they are benevolent. I typically just call them benevolent ones. Yeah. As they've started to guide me to certain information, it really truly revealed itself finally in the proper context, which was not only that these things had gotten here not on their own accord, they can't get out either. They're kind of stuck here, and they're just trying to survive. Not that does not excuse their behavior in any way or shape or form, but I'm just trying to help people understand that these things, that's their, like any other life form.
Now, let me ask you this, and I'll try not to derail your narrative too much, but in your sense, are these beings highly intelligent? Are they sentient? What are their capabilities? It appears as though they're non-physical in terms of our own dimensional perception, but at the same time, it also seems that they have some, I guess you would call it, super physical form.
Yeah, apparently they can change their shape. The pictures that I've sort of dug up, mostly were taken by Trevor James Constable back in the 50s, but also NASA got something that looks very, very similar, if not the same, fairly recently when they were doing the tether experiment. These things are, and they can change shape as far as I know, but typically they look like an amoeba. Obviously they're not microscopic. And, there's so many different people, or cultures that have talked about them, but they always seem to have the same type of way of describing them,
these are archetypal in appearance. When I began looking at your work and going back and doing research into this, I realized that this was a huge archetype in terms of how these things appear and how they've been depicted, visualized, and presented over what looks like hundreds, if not a few thousand years.
Yeah, and I'm thinking probably 10,000 years or so since they... See, the thing about it, we can't really separate them, these parasites, from the beings that they possess or infect. I think infect is probably a more accurate term because a lot of times people that are infected don't even realize, the mental, physical, spiritual state that they're in. At least that's the way they act. So when they came here, the fallen ones came here and they literally turned this from a paradise planet into a prison planet. It's not the only world, but they did that to this world and to all of us, our ancestors, I should say. We're enslaved by the Archon hierarchy. And the benevolent ones had never really encountered anything like this before. Like I said, it truly was alien to them. So most of them had to flee for their lives until they could figure out how to deal with it. But they always promised that they would return and assist mankind here, or, not only just to liberate, but to rehabilitate us and put the world back the way it was as a perfect biosphere.
Right,
that sustains life at its fullest potential, as opposed to what we're living through now.
Right, exactly.
It's, polar opposites.
It really is kind of the whole fallen world scenario when you think about it. Even what little shreds we get inside of, like the Bible, which gives us what I consider to be a very broken narrative, we get that sense. We get the sense that nature itself is in revolt at this point.
Well, because the entire cosmos is an intelligent living energy. We exist are the byproduct of the creation of a very mature soul. A very mature soul that has literally, my analogy is like a tree. When it's mature, it blooms and it drops a bunch of seeds.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what our universe was. It developed from a seed, a seed of light, which we could call a soul. It developed, it bloomed, call it the Big Bang. I think of it more as a big bloom. But when it bloomed, it matured and it went to seed. It literally seeded this entire universe that it created, and we're all part of that. And I mean, literally, according to science, we're all connected on some level energetically. It's called entanglement.
Yeah, quantum entanglement. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So for anybody who's interested, just look up Bell's theorem and you'll get more detail.
Yeah, great stuff.
It's important because not only are we all related, but we really are all connected. And that's where the things about telepathy and empathy or empathic type of, action at a distance and information exchanges and stuff. I mean, it supersedes anything that we can do with technology. I was shown that actually during my contact up there in the mountains in Malibu was that we're all connected through this web of light.
Yes.
Okay. And that's permanent. That is permanent unless we choose to disconnect ourselves. And that's unfortunate because that's what a lot of us here have been persuaded or dissuaded into believing, in other words, believing the lie. And so we just literally disconnect by our own volition at some point, and now we're stuck in the matrix, which is a completely false construct. And it's what that's doing is stifling our potential as seeds of light here in this garden. And
this matrix it's actually an artificial construct we're rooted into.
Yeah, it's completely artificial, and we were never designed to live like this. And as I said, it truly is foreign or alien. The movie The Matrix is, it's a good metaphor.
Yes.
They're not machines, but they're machine-like. You were asking about their intelligence. They're intelligent enough to know how to survive like any other hive-like, insect or parasite. They do. Look, I mean, even plants communicate.
You just hit on an important concept there, the idea of the hive mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's so repugnant to us as humans right now because we consider ourselves to be each of us independent consciousness, which we are, and yet, as you just pointed out, we also are intimately connected to each other. There's all these weird paradoxes that go into all these concepts, but the idea of the hive mind seems to come up, and it came up for me. I've been researching UFOs and extraterrestrial phenomena since I was a kid, mainly because of the experiences that I had when I was young, and that continued for a long time. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I was very interested in the nature of these beings. And one of the things that I discovered probably this was late discovery, was the work of a man named Nigel Kerner, who wrote a book called Gray Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls.
Yes, I know Nigel.
And I've done like 6 hours of interviews with Nigel and his associates, and you know that Nigel can really pour the information out.
Yep.
But Nigel hit on some key concepts that I thought were important to understanding the archons. The Greys appear to me to be some kind of machine-like hive mind species, but they appear to not be autonomous, but to be some sort of automaton creation of a higher intelligence.
Right. Yeah, they're just drones or android of some sort. They do collectively work off of a network, I guess you'd say. It's hard for me to say for sure because I don't really spend a lot of time dealing with them. I'm more focused on the benevolent ones. I know that the Greys exist and that they're just an extension of this Archon matrix.
Right.
But they're not the only ones. I mean, there's human beings that are they're absolutely part of it. Like agents in the movie. Anybody could become an agent, and that's unfortunate. But it's true, especially if you go to Washington D.C., you're walking right into, ritual magic. The Beltway is actually a place where, if you want to look at it in religious terms, that was designed to literally bind Satan to that location.
Yeah, it's a circuit.
Yes, very much so. It's a circuit that taps into this really negative, dark energy that they need in order to sustain themselves.
Well, and then you look at the giant obelisk in the reflecting pool that sits there in the center of D.C.
Yep.
You look at the similar edifice that exists in the Vatican. I mean, I've got one across the river from me in the capital city of Pennsylvania. The same thing. And you start seeing these structures, and this will get us back later on, these megalithic structures that seem to serve no purpose except to energize some sort of transfer of energy. And I know Washington, D.C., Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is a microcosm of Washington. It is a replica of Washington on a micro scale. Mm-hmm. And the energetics of the city itself completely parallel it.
Well, I mean, Rome was the blueprint for Washington,
exactly.
D.C. And wherever the Romans go, they build these replica of their original Capitolium that sat on one of the 7 hills of Rome.
Right. It
was the place where the senators would go and have counsel with their one Lord, true God, Jove. Okay, Jove was later cast out, and they transferred him into Jehovah when they turned into the Christian.
Right, which was Yahweh, basically.
Right, but the name Jove literally was served them up until the time that it was. I mean, he was the head of the Lord, overlord of all the other gods. So he was the one, and he was always depicted as a man. But like I said, all they did was convert him from Jove to Jehovah. So but it's the same thing. They would go in there and seek his counsel, as it were, which is weird because if it was just a statue, a stone statue, how is that going to give them any advice whatsoever on how to run an empire? Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I mean, there's something more to that story that we're not getting. But anyway, the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is a replica of the Capitolium. And originally it wasn't called D.C. It was called New Rome. And there's a lot of things that I dug up for the second book that were just shocking to me. I really didn't want to publish the second book, but again, a lot of things I didn't really want to do.
You didn't really even want to know this stuff after you got done with it.
No, I didn't, but I sure, the other thing is I didn't want to be a target. I didn't want to be the one who was bringing this information out. But the thing I realized was I don't really have the luxury of, denying the information a conduit, because people do need to realize these things, even though it's being denied by the powers that be. It's important that people do recognize the timeline, the arc of how we got here into this mess. And the Archons are not all powerful. That's why they do things covertly. That's why they manipulate others covertly. That's why they twist the truth around and are constantly, denying things that are absolutely true. And because they know that at some point, if enough people wake up and recognize that they exist, that the Archons really do exist and that they are manipulating us, once we reach a tipping point where there's enough people that say, whoa, that explains it. Now I see why people do what they do. Then it's the beginning of the end for them. Because, the human spirit is such that because of free will, we do not want to be, we're not comfortable being puppets, or slaves. We were never designed to do that. And so, part of us, like in the movie The Matrix, we want to break free and, continue our path, as seeds of light, souls, so this information has been suppressed for a long time. That's why the Gnostics were utterly annihilated. Anybody who had any Gnostic,
exactly,
any group that picked up the Gnostic or Hermetic teachings along the way through history has been utterly decimated.
The Cathars, the Albigenses, I guess they were called.
That's right.
numbers of groups where the Crusades were actually in the beginning nothing more than a search and destroy mission for what they were calling the heretics, which were the preservers of this knowledge.
The original Christians.
Exactly, yes.
Who saw Christ as an avatar.
Yes.
Who was not a physical being. He was one of the benevolents that had volunteered to come here in the midst of a hostile territory and sort of take point.
Yes, exactly. That's
and look, even though they completely twisted his ministry and work here after the fact, a lot of what the essence of what he was set out to do actually did survive in this regard. By demonstrating forgiveness in the face of utter torture, the worst violations you can imagine as he was being crucified, he was forgiving them. And by demonstrating that ability, he set something in motion in people if it hadn't happened like that, we would probably be in a much darker place than we're at right now. So
yeah, that spirit has carried down through history. And it's, Robert, I spent a lot of years in Christianity, and I was on radio early in 2000 for about 5 years when I began to have doubts and ask a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I ask, and I'm like you, I ask questions, and eventually I'm led to look at something, go somewhere, talk to somebody like we're talking tonight. Mm-hmm. But I at one point asked, how is it that they so completely altered the story of this person who walked the planet, but they didn't just wipe it out altogether? And the answer that I got back was they required a significant amount of that story in order to contain the main truth. Mm-hmm. In other words, they could allow that to live as long as nobody ever asked the questions about who was the enemy. When we focused on this Messiah being, and we generalized everything, we never had a sense of our enemy because the Old Testament had been expunged as well.
True.
And so all of these old books, including the Quran, by the way, and I interviewed last year an Islamic man about the jinn, and we did a good show. But we've all had our memory banks wiped, and we've had our histories altered that we do not know enough about these beings.
True. Well, so as you probably know, most people in the Christian community, and certainly outside it, are painfully unaware of the alleged event that happened just before the crucifixion, and that's when he went up on a mount or a mountain with a few of his disciples, and he literally began to glow in the dark.
The transfiguration, yeah.
Yeah. Most people overlook that, and what really floored me a few years ago when I started looking at it, I mentioned it to a Native American shaman I've become friends with out here in New England. He's like, "Oh, you didn't know?" Because, and he says, "Yeah, that's you should have." I'm surprised you didn't know that. I said that. He said that's very similar to what happened to you. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what I can do with that, but thanks for telling me about it. I mean, he just was acting like it was no big deal. Like, why are you acting surprised? And so the more I looked into it, I realized that it wasn't the first time. Supposedly when he was baptized.
Here's an interesting side detail to that. I just learned this in the last few months. I've been reading some esoteric texts that were entrusted to me by a teacher who passed on. John the Baptist stated that he was unworthy to even unlatch the sandals of Jesus the Christ. Mm-hmm. I've now learned that the unlatching of the sandals is in fact an esoteric metaphor for what we've been talking about, the transfiguration, your own enlightenment experience. It is literally the unlatching of the feet anchoring to the earth and the elevation of the spiritual estate.
Releasing one's soul.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Well, here's the other thing. God, I just get a huge chill when you're talking to me about this.
I shared that chill, by the way. Yeah.
So okay. So that was 1985. In 1975, I was in Egypt. I was 15, and my parents, I'd been traveling for 2 years with my parents, off and on to over 50 countries when I was a teenager.
Wow.
And yeah, it was just one of those things. And, but the final trip, and we always went on these cruise ships. My parents were working and I sort of helped them, and it was really quite an adventure. But the bottom line is this: I'm only 15 and I find myself going inside the Great Pyramid by myself, because my parents said, no, we don't want to go in there. Okay, I'm going, and I went in there and I spent some time alone in the Queen's Chamber, so-called. Mm-hmm. And then I ascended the Grand Gallery, and I got to those massive stone locks before you get into the so-called King's Chamber. And I was looking at that, and then I realized there was a bunch of people in there. They were part of a tour group. But I decided I would go in there anyway just to have a look around. And I was in there for, I don't know, very, very short time. I walked in. I was in the back of the room with all these people, and a local guide wearing a white robe and some sort of head thing. He struck that stone box with a wooden mallet, and it rang like a tuning fork. Mm-hmm. And I could literally hear and feel the energy of it moving around the room in a spiral, which I believe they call that the golden mean.
You're right.
In a rectangle, when you do that, it does this weird spiraling thing. Anyway, it's some geometric thing about creation. Anyway.
It's called, well, that's actually, the box itself is rectangular or square. And so the waveform itself is circumferential.
It's like a nautilus, yeah.
It's called circling the square. That's actually an ancient ritual as well.
Yeah, it is. But okay, so the geometry of it blew my mind, because I was my mom was a concert pianist, so I did a lot of.
Okay.
I knew.
You recognized the tonal.
Oh, I mean, yeah, because I'd played violin in orchestra for a few years. So, yeah. I mean, I was really listening intently to this thing and feeling it. And the next thing I know, my vision went completely white. Mm-hmm. And my hearing I heard this, it's like I was passing out. It was weird, but I was completely awake. And it was like I got this hissing noise in my ears, and my vision went white. And the next thing I know, it felt like I was standing outside the pyramid, which I'm like, what? I mean, I wasn't expecting any of this. I was not expecting it at all. And I wasn't there very long, but I felt like, now understand, I was within a room of people, but when I was outside the pyramid, I felt like there was other beings out there, but they didn't seem human to me. And I'm looking at the pyramid, I'm looking at them, and the next thing I know, I'm back in the pyramid, and the sound is now like dissipating, almost like it's going down a drain, Mm-hmm. And I'm looking around at these people, and I'm thinking, did everybody just see that? I really had no idea, And so as they started filing out, I went over to the guide, and I was trying to ask him, why did you do that? What was that all about? I thought maybe he knew that, that if you hit this, everybody goes, out of the pyramid and back in. I was like, what the? And he looked at me. I know he spoke English, but he probably thought I was nuts, because I think I was a little incoherent at that time. I was really stunned. And, the reason I bring that up is because if you fast forward 10 years later, what was it that I was doing was, the frequencies that I was generating in my body through the earth at the top of a mountain, which, okay, is a pyramid. I mean, that's where I was. I was at the upper third of the apex of the pyramid. It's an artificial mountain, and clearly energy is focused in that like a lens. And so, especially in the chambers, those relief chambers, they call them relief chambers, and they are, but the energy passes through there and then feeds back. I mean, that was the thing. When he struck that thing, it not only was it spiraling, it actually got louder. It got louder. He just hit it once, and normally you hit a tuning fork and it just kind of goes out.
Right.
It just fades out.
But
no.
what did you do when you were on top of the rock and when you were doing the Aum? You placed your tongue up against the palate of your mouth, which created a resonance chamber inside your mouth against the bone.
No, not only that, just above that, if you look at a diagram of the human head,
it's a chamber.
It is. It's a hollow place called the Cave of Brahma.
Exactly.
A doctor would call it a corpus callosum.
Yes, exactly.
But it is a hollow place. And so, of course, the resonance is going to build in there, right there. There was a book by a guy named Chris Thomas, and I believe that was his name. He wrote a really interesting book about this, and he said that that's where our reality is there. That's where we see everything, that we create a hologram in there.
I know who this guy is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and this was years ago. You know, see, the thing is, when I came down off the mountain that back in September, it would have been September 22nd, actually, when I came down. But, and you know, if you look in history, that is a very auspicious day. A lot of times, very transformative things do happen, either intentionally or unintentionally on that day to different people throughout time, including the guy who's the guy with sorry, I'm blanking out here, the Mormon.
Joseph Smith.
Thank you. He had that encounter with the so-called angel Moroni on that date, and who led him to those artifacts, which later became supposedly translated, etc. So that's just one example. And by the way, I'm not trying to start a religion, okay? But I was struck by some of the similarities of this glowing being coming into his room and communicating with him. But anyway, there's something about these higher energies when we connect with them that increases. What it does is it connects us to the cosmos, or I should say reconnects us. It seems supernatural to us at the time, but in fact, it's really our natural state.
Well, it's the formative state. If you go and you look at, and you know, even though I know the Bible was altered, I don't walk away from what's actually in there. But in the beginning, it says in the Gospel of John was the Word, and the Word was God. Well, the Word is Logos, and it is the formative initiatory vibration of creation. Yep.
Yeah, and that is the thing. When a soul becomes mature enough to create an entire universe, part of the thought process is it says, I am that I am. Mm-hmm. It becomes what they call self-realized.
Self-existent, self-realized.
Yes, because, yes. Yes, okay, because our thoughts define us, because thoughts, energy, this is the other thing that came. It's so much, when I came off the mountain, it was like the beginning of a whole new life in a lot of ways. As far as I was interested in certain things, but suddenly I found that there was stuff just kept coming at me.
It's like a binary download, wasn't it?
You know, I still don't know everything that happened while I was there. Like I said, I suspect I know, I would assume that I wanted to visit when I was in that other state. I really feel like I went to visit that boy, and that's how I knew that there were scars on his soul from these things convincing him that he was somehow something other than what he really was, you know, a being of light. They had literally infested his thinking to the point where it was starting to scar his soul imprint. Because, and here's how I kind of know that to be scientifically, is over the years, it's somebody gave me a book, a series about digital physics. It's sort of, that's what they're calling it, but it's what it states is that consciousness is primary, and that to summarize, consciousness can take three phase states. Like a drop of water can be a solid, a liquid, or a gas.
Right.
Consciousness can be pure consciousness, energy, or matter, depending on its vibratory state. The thing is, why this is important is it's all self-referential. Okay. It can't really fully separate from itself. It can, however, like I said, if a person chooses to believe a lie or accept a lie that they're not part of all this, and they want to go down that path and explore it, well, that's what hell is, in my opinion. It's a state of mind And that's not a trivial thing, by the way. It's not just rattling around in the gray matter of your brain. It's resonating. These thoughts are frequencies. I mean, look, nothing in this world comes into being without having existed as a thought. And when I'm talking about man-made, right? Everything that's physical starts off as a concept. And a concept, a thought, is not a physical thing, and yet it's interconnected to the physical world, right? And that's where these things cross the boundary. That's when you were asking me about their intelligence and their abilities. They don't have to be physical. They don't need to be. As long as they can manipulate our thought process, if they can go into our minds, like they say, the jinn says they can whisper into a man's soul.
Yeah.
That is not a good thing. That cannot be a good thing. By any stretch of the imagination, that is unholy.
Well, that is almost the definition of schizophrenia clinically.
Yeah, and that's why someone who works in this field actually contacted me when they heard me.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because this is a good data point.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the name he used, but I listened to that interview.
Dr. J. Yeah, Dr. J. That's not his name.
Now, this is a man who he's a clinical psychologist. He's working in mental institutions, psych wards, and prisons where you have people that I guess you would call criminally insane. And as a result of his experiences, and I think, truthfully hearing his interview, he was also being led intuitively.
Yeah.
He began to correlate that psychiatry, which has profiled this type of behavior and classed it as being different orders, has also consistently treated it using psychoactive drugs. And I believe... Look, one more tangent here. You and I have both interviewed Steve Richards of Holographic Kinetics.
Yeah.
And you and I both know, I've done 3 interviews with Steve, and one of the things that we talked about extensively was the impact of using psychoactive drugs on people already exhibiting bipolar or schizophrenic behavior patterns. And so here's a man who I think is a great man just for being, frankly, having the stones come out and say what he said and risking his reputation. Yeah. But also the insights that you glean from an interview with somebody like that, who's boots on the ground dealing with what is, frankly, the spiritual septic tank of humanity right now. Mm-hmm. So you gained in that basically a whistleblower right inside the system.
Well, he was asking for my help, by the way, because he figured I could, because I've, become a spokesperson for this. I was never planning this, but, okay, so whatever. It is what it is. And he wanted me to help him write a book, and I agreed at first, and boy, wow, was I surprised at how vicious the attacks became. Against me, energetically. They were going just all out to stop me from working with Dr. J. And at some point I had to say, hey, I can't do this. I'm physically, every time I sit down here at the computer, I feel like,
you're being drained.
Not just drained. I feel like somebody's putting electrical shocks into my teeth. And he knew exactly, that's one of the things he'd seen exhibited to him as a demonstration that these things literally can, on a limited scale, create, affect our reality, with like some kind of very weird electrical intelligence. So they can affect computers, they can affect our nervous system. And, certainly the pain was excruciating. I went to the dentist and he says, you're fine. He says, you're fine. But the upshot of all this, so he goes, you don't have any bacterial thing going on. You're right. Physically, mechanically, everything's intact. He goes, but next time you feel that electricity, call me. And I went, I didn't say electricity. What is he talking about? And then it started to dawn on me. Then I really started looking into my mouth, and I found that I had sores in there. And I thought, wait a minute. So I went to a doctor, ear, nose, and throat guy. He goes, oh, you got a virus. Really? I got a virus. He goes, I said, what kind? He goes, I don't know. Well, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. What? Oh, slow down here. No, I can't live like this, And he says, there's nothing I can give you. And I walked out and I go, okay, this is really funny, guys. I'm not going to just let you do this to me. And if you think you're going to stop me, you're absolutely 100% wrong. And so once I realized it was a virus that they put in me, which is that is an artificial construct that they can create, sort of like genetic manipulation. See, they can't create genes, but they can manipulate them.
Got it. Yeah.
And that's what viruses do, man. That's all they're designed to do is do genetic manipulation for their advantage, not ours. So I remembered, oh, yes, there are Amazon botanicals that I can take that are known to eradicate viruses. Started doing that, and I was like, I had a very powerful LED light, and I started shining it in my mouth. You're not going to believe this, but the viruses literally retreated out of my mouth and went down further into my esophagus. And it was so painful, but at least my teeth didn't feel like they were being, electrocuted. But I mean, it was just the most insane thing, if I didn't know what was going on, it would have really, really done a number on me. But the truth of the matter is I kept working. I'm in constant contact with Dr. J, and actually people all over the planet have been contacting me, and mainly just as a thanking me and also offering their confirmation that, this is real because, hey, they're saying I've experienced it too and wanting to share. So that's why I say. No,
I've experienced it too, and I've experienced it within the last 5 or 6 years.
I am not surprised, and because, like I said, this thing is either real or it's not, and I would not have ever come out publicly unless I was convinced that it was real, and furthermore that I could prove it. And the reason that it's coming up right now is because we have entered into a place that NASA calls the fluff. And in fact, it is, some people in esoteric circles call it the photon zone or the photon band.
Right.
It's a giant charged, cloud of charged particles. In other words, again, it's an energy field. If you remember what I said, energy is consciousness. And so there's an intelligence here, a higher intelligence that we have literally become embedded in. Us meaning our solar system, which is actually a bubble of energy called a heliosphere.
Right.
Okay, so it is now completely immersed in this massive cloud of charged particles, energy, that NASA doesn't want to tell people about, but it's out there if you look for it. And they say it's going to take at least 200 years for us to transit through it. So this is, strategically, this is a very important time for the benevolent ones, of the beings of light, to come in here and start cleaning things up, because it's the reason also I'm telling you this is because this is why the beings, the archons, and all the ones that they manipulate, they're acting out of desperation. They know that they feel that they're slipping their grip, and that's why they're doing these just. I mean, they're getting worse, not better. Okay, they're acting really, really desperate.
Well, let's just look for a minute at their human, we'll call them that, and we'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
They're human foot soldiers on the ground right now, what people euphemistically call the New World Order, the Cabal, or the Illuminati.
Right.
But if you look at the world right now and you look at what's going on, I mean, look, we got an economic system that is based on nothing. It is tanking. We have a complete fracturing of political alliances. I mean, did you really think we grew up, at least in what you would call the post-Cold War years? Did you ever really think you would live to see Russia looking like the good guys on the planet? The Chinese. I mean, see, everything is inverting. Everything is stepping up, and they are growing increasingly desperate. These false flags that they've been pulling off since 2001. Have become incredibly intrusive and violent. You see, you can start with the mass shooters, Georgia Tech. That's where I started tracking all this. I mean, I go back to the JFK assassination.
Oh, yeah.
So you have all these dark moves that are being made by the cabal who are acting whether they know it or not. And I think at the high levels they do, at the low levels they don't understand
Correct.
that they are they are basically the foot soldiers of these beings.
Yeah, they're pawns. But you're right. The people at the top, the so-called elite, they're pawns also, but they're willing pawns. They've sold out.
Exactly.
That's what Dr. J said. Some people actually have a relationship where they know they're getting something out of it, so they just keep doing it. They've sold out. But here's, in summary, this is totally unsustainable. It was never, it's totally alien, foreign. And the other thing is, the part of the problem here is because they want to keep us divided against ourselves. That's the other reason it's unsustainable. It's utterly unstable. Okay, to have a house divided, it can't stand. So you see, civilizations are constantly rising and falling, and it's like the body is sort of tearing itself apart because it has no stability whatsoever because it was based on a false foundation.
Yeah.
Right, of this manipulative archonic matrix, and it's just a matter of time before I know people don't like it when I say this, but there is going to be an intervention. However, the caveat to that is my understanding about all of this, because I've been asked to see, how I was very curious. How does this get resolved? Is it possible? I really didn't know. And I figured because I am speaking about this, I think I have a responsibility to help people see what's coming, if that's even possible. So again, just like I asked before about clarity, I also asked about how does this conflict get resolved?
Right.
If it can be resolved. And the answer was quite surprising to me, but it made a lot of sense, which is all these things will be revealed to everyone in full. And
what we call disclosure.
You might call it that, but it won't just be about extraterrestrials.
Right.
It will literally be the archons and everything. All the cards are going to be on the table at some point here, I believe, no later than 2020. At that time, because we are beings of free will, people are going to have to make a decision whether or not they want to continue to be pawns of the archons, or do they want to return to their natural state as a being of light in a universe of light beings. In other words, reconnect with our true family and step out of the matrix. That was the end of the movie, right? I watched it again last night.
Yeah.
That was the whole upshot of that whole thing. The Oracle wanted to do all of that was really to wake up more people and give them the opportunity to step out.
I think that's also why that movie has become such an effective metaphor. I mean, that movie came out, in 1999 or something?
Right.
And yet look at how it is now. I mean, a 5-year-old understand, well, maybe not a 5-year-old, but most people in the culture understand the Matrix metaphorically as meaning, quote, this prison planet or this false concept reality that we're embedded in.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the biggest metaphor for me was that we're not their battery, but we are their energy source. See, that there's a distinction there because they're not machines, but they need that negative energy in order to survive here, and they can't get it unless they manipulate us to do harm to ourselves or others or both. And that's why we see so much every day in our face violence and anger and confusion. They thrive off of that because we literally are feeding them what they need. And so, like I said, that's also why, though, they can't be overt or truthful or honest about who they are, why they're here, and what's our role. You remember in The Matrix, the architect said to Neo at one point, he says, there's been many different variations of the Matrix. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he says, there was one where we actually let everybody know what was going on, and they just they didn't produce. It was like a passive aggressive. They just refused. They just said, screw this, Well,
and I think that's true because, look, we live in such limited lifespans. We don't understand how vast time has been in terms of even human existence in this present dimension, or how many times we've been through this, because I tend to believe that we're kind of like caught in time loops sometimes. Where and this is something Steve Richards talks about. Where basically a particular moment, what you would call an inception, is created, which then begins to loop back on itself. And the only way that you can effectively change things is to change a key element inside the game, which is what this really is on a cosmic level.
Well, like I said, I do feel it's an anomaly, and it was utterly not part of the creation of this original universe. I mean, we call it our home, our origins are here. That's what I mean by original. It is not the only universe. Universes are being born all the time.
Sure.
I personally feel like there is no limit to the amount of universes that can be created, because it's just like a computer. You just keep adding more memory. And so therefore you can write more programs, you can create more files. It's just, I mean, it really is. When I said digital physics, I meant that. A digit of consciousness is either on or off, but it still exists. It has potential.
Well, it's one state or another, yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because it's off doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay, so this is the thing. We have an unlimited amount of potential, but it's being denied us by these Archon, these parasites. I mean, look, we know for a fact that parasites affect all living systems negatively. This world was never designed that way. When you talk about short lifespans, we were never designed to live such a short lifespan.
No,
when this world was still intact, our ancestors were much larger, smarter, healthier. They lived much longer, relatively speaking. They lived a natural, normal lifespan of 1,000 years or more. That's not unheard of at all. I mean, the body can regenerate itself, and it does so naturally, unless it's being bombarded with all kinds of, toxic crap.
Oh, look at the world right now. GMOs, the chemtrailing that's going on. And everything in our ecosystem has been by human facility altered in some way, so that, I mean, I go through this all the time trying to even figure out what to eat anymore.
Yeah, or breathe, or drink. You can't see, but this is the thing, that you can say it's humans. But if this is one of the great strategies that has served the Archons really well, is convincing us that they don't exist. Therefore, we don't do anything about it. Look, if you don't know you have a problem, you're certainly not going to act to solve it. And that's what they've done, is convince enough of us that they don't exist, that the Archon is not a parasitical infection, and that everything you see around you is just a random event, and there's no consciousness involved in it. It's just, business as usual. All right. People are flawed, and we make mistakes, and, we're all victims essentially in this narrative, this false narrative that we're living under in the Matrix. Like I said, it's an artificial construct. It's the furthest thing from the truth that you could possibly imagine. And that's why it was a hard thing for me to finally understand what the truth is. It took years. And ultimately, it was like unlearning. I think the hardest part was unlearning so many of the lies that we've been so-called taught or conditioned to. We're literally programmed. We are programmed from birth through vaccines and other things that, even religion.
Especially religion.
Especially religion.
And you look at people, and listen, I was an ordained minister at one point in time. I understand the responsibility that you have as a spiritual leader. And in fact, that's what took me down the dark path. Was I realized that you can't be responsible for people spiritually if you yourself don't know the truth and teach the truth. Well, and religion has hidden all this stuff. I mean, look, this knowledge somehow or another was expunged, and yet it couldn't be escaped. They burned the library at Alexandria, but isn't it odd? I don't know. Maybe you've never thought about this, but I've thought about this for years, Robert. Look what happened between 1945 and 1947, the post-World War II period, the period when you begin to have heightened UFO activity, heightened the post-nuclear age, when we've set off these horrible bombs. and what appears, the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, and then in 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls surface. It's almost like the earth itself was holding these for a time when they were supposed to be revealed.
It's not that simple, Randy. The benevolent ones work behind the scenes. They are special forces here. You can call them whatever you want, but I mean, that's what they do. And it's a tough assignment. They never take credit for what they do, or rarely are they identified for what they do. But they certainly play a role in our path here. And when they do come forward, if they're ever identified, people typically deny it because they're so conditioned to only see the agents of the Matrix. They only obey the Archon. So when a being of light does appear, it is unwelcome.
Discredited.
And they are discredited and as much as possible. And so because they, and look, a lot of that happened to me too. When I first came out with this story, I got into a conflict and I exposed someone, and it really turned ugly. And there were people who tried to accuse me of things that are simply not true. And I realized in retrospect that all they're doing is keeping people who are in the dark from coming to the light. Because that's all I do. I'm just here to help people through that process by sharing what I've learned. And I don't have an agenda, unless you consider that an agenda, is assisting my fellow mankind. I mean, I'm just saying that the Matrix knows how to defend itself, and attacking somebody's character is pretty simple. But it's not that effective. Just like I said, when they attacked me that day on the beach, the unintended consequences was that it literally it was like an egg hatching. It was that pressure of them doing that caused me to sort of like in the Matrix, where he broke out of his little that false embryo. That he was plugged into. It unplugged me. I was unplugged. But like I said, what was happening as I was unplugging, there was a whole other group there in the light that was there to assist me and everybody else. That like I said, we are not alone in this at all. That's one of the other big lies that we're just told. Oh, God's out there. The angels are out there. If you have a contact with them, it's like, oh, that's rare. No, it's not. It's not. They're always here and they're always watching, and they're just not welcome here because the powers that be clearly are opposed to any kind of liberation. Here's the thing. My understanding is they look at us as their property. They captured this planet. They enslaved us.
Basically, as livestock.
Yeah, and right. As Charles Fort said, I think we're someone's property. Or at least that's what it's looking like. That's
exactly, yeah, it's a great quote.
Okay, so, well, it's unfortunate, really, because it's not true. But as I said, what's happened over the eons here, a lot of souls have been recycled. And this was the thing about the Gnostics, what they were so concerned about is that if you don't break free of the Matrix at some point, you're going to think that's all there is. Mm-hmm. And if you believe it, that's what you'll live. And so that's why at this time.
And that's exactly what you just described there is exactly what I was calling earlier the time loops, the inception points, because that's kind of the way it was displayed to me.
Look, our thoughts.
Yeah.
In physics, you talk about the slit experiment. Where the observer affects the outcome. Yeah, it's even more profound than that.
Schrodinger's cat on a basic level. Yeah,
exactly. But it's more complicated than that because our thoughts resonate out into the cosmos, which is an intelligent living energy, and when we send out these negative or false constructs of our thought processes going out, what we get back is confirmation of these things.
Oh, that's incredible.
So there's the loop. There's the feedback mechanism. And so what it does is it we go, oh, it is real. The lie is real. You see, and it's not. It's just feeding back on itself. And it's so, a lot of people have been caught in that trap. And that's another reason why, because we're all related. That's why these benevolent beings have put so much effort into coming into hostile territory and helping as much as possible without violating our free will. They are assisting us to break free and continue on our path, as beings of light.
So, do you know, can you give us details about the level or type of interventions that we can expect leading into that 2020 period?
Yeah, you talk about false flags. I hope I'm not giving things away that are going to alter the course here.
No, I actually think the people that need to hear this will hear it and the rest of them won't.
That's true. Okay, so the way it was described to me was that the extraterrestrials who are part of the Archon Matrix are going to, as a final, their final trick that they're going to pull on us is to create this disclosure and it's going to be headed up by the UN. And of course, the Catholic Church has already sort of paved the way for that.
Yes,
they're going to be major players in all of this. And they'll say, they've come to save us, and they're going to help us put up a space defense. And by the way, they're also going to help because good old UN, they've got their troops, supposedly peacekeeping troops, right?
Yeah.
They're going to enforce roughly a new world order where, everybody has to come under this one umbrella.
We're going to have peace, and if you don't have it, you will be shot.
Well, or maybe neutralized, I think would be a better word, because they'll be bringing out the alien technology. So if you want to just erase somebody's mind and pacify them that way, sort of like a digital lobotomy, that's going to be acceptable under the new world order. I mean, truly, it'll seem brand new, but here's the part about it. It's the real, like everything else they do, it's a freaking lie. They've been here all along, and if you look at my research in Washington D.C., they are there all the time, and yet our government is saying nope, they don't exist.
Listen, I don't know. Do you know who Bob Dean is?
Of course, he's an old
friend. Bob Dean told me in an interview that I did with him early on in this show that they literally walk the halls of the Pentagon. He said, I've seen them. I've sat on planes with them.
Yep. Okay. But so now those are just the humans that can walk among us.
Right.
There's all types of humanoids that are part of the Archon Matrix that are here. Some of them are covert agents. They're double agents, and they're doing what they can. I mean, those are on a physical level. Then you've got these other beings we would call angelic that are they work in overtime to make things happen within certain parameters. Okay, they do have rules and regulations they have to live by, but so anyways, what I'm seeing is, or what I've shown is that this whole false flag thing about they're our saviors, they're here, they're out. When that happens, that's the beginning of the end. That is the beginning of the final days of the Matrix here. I suspect that there will be, as you might refer to biblically, as a separating of the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah. Yep.
And that a lot of us will literally be taken through portals to other worlds that are still pristine paradise worlds where we can continue our path as beings of light. The other beings here, the humans that are here, are going to, they will be evicted along with the Archons. They're going to literally be I'm not sure exactly where they're going, but they're not welcome here anymore. They never really were. But, one of the things that I've kind of struggled with, I should just say real quick about this. It seemed to me like if there's, benevolent God and angels, why would they let all this suffering go on here for so long? And the answer I got, which was very shocking, but it made a lot of sense, is that 1,000 years to man is but a day
to God.
To God.
Yeah.
Okay, or the gods, the angelic hierarchy, because they're immortal beings, this to them is they've been working on it. They got on it right away. They've been working on it, but because we look at things so differently. There's a distortion there, sort of like a Doppler effect. We just process things differently. So they never abandoned us. They never just said, "Oh, we'll get around to that someday." It was never like that. They've always been working. Again, most of it is behind the scenes. That's the only way they can do it. And timing is everything. And that's why I mentioned before, the fact that we are in this energetically charged area right now, it's sort of like the high ground for them. It is the time for them to really do the final push. If you know anything about a tipping point, if you ever study about tipping points, yeah. It's real interesting because it's to certain outside observers, they're like, "Oh, well, yeah." After the fact, they're like, "Yeah, everybody knows that." Well, what you don't see is all the leverage, all the energy and effort that went into getting to the tipping point. There's a lot that goes into actually achieving, but once you've gotten there, everybody on the other side of it, they're like, yeah, sure, that's normal.
We saw that coming.
Yeah. It's like everybody's,
hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, sure. So anyway, this is a process. It's been going on for, relatively speaking, on Earth terms, it's been going on since the beginning of the fall. There was never any intention to let this go in the direction. It wasn't part of the plan. Okay. So what they had to do is come up with contingency plans to deal with this darkness that fell in this world that has entrapped so many souls here just to feed these damn parasites, who don't even belong here. So anyway, like I said, at some point though, I think the conflict resolution will come and it'll simply be utter 100% separating. There is no longer blending, the beings of light. What they said in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the sons of darkness and the sons of light.
Right.
They won't be battling with each other anymore because they'll have what they want. In essence, there are people who will willingly continue to be pawns of the Archons. They're just not going to be allowed to do it here anymore. And the other thing is the planet has been so badly damaged that everybody's got to get off of it. All the life forms have got to go because they're going to become extinct anyway. And that's not part of the plan. So there's other worlds that are easily accessible through these portals, and the benevolent ones are going to orchestrate this.
Do you see, or have you been made aware that there will be an eventual refurbishing of the Earth, that the Earth itself will be reclaimed, but that it requires a cleansing first?
Yeah, but we're not going to be here for that. And in fact, all life is going to be taken off because it's not their fault that it's gotten into such a degraded
So you see
state.
a total planetary evacuation.
Yeah, and people are like, when I say that, they really think I've lost my mind. But if you've read my article about the portal in the Pacific, that's one of many portals. See, this is the thing. The good guys are not going to show up in these massive spaceships and go, "Come on, we're taking you to planet whatever." No, that's not how it's going to happen. Those guys, that's the Archons. When they show up like that, they got the blessings of the UN and the Vatican. Hell no. Nope. Those are really the beings that we see on television that you get nightmares about. They've always been, in relative terms, they've been running the show here for like at least 10,000 years now.
And the other side to that is that I've talked to obviously enormous amounts of people over the years. Yeah. And one of the commonalities of some of the people that I work with, in fact, is that we've all had these dreams of a place that feels like home, but it's not here. Mm-hmm. And it feels other dimensional, and yet at the same time it feels oddly familiar. You just mentioned the island. So let people know about that story and where they can find that. Well,
you'd have to go to my website at unicusmagazine.com.
Oh, and they should.
Yeah, thanks. unicusmagazine.com. And go to articles. It's right there. I don't know about there's no direct link. Just look at the megaliths of Malibu. that'll get you to the link for the. Okay, specifically the.
I'll put a link up with the show, so that'll just make it easy.
All right, that's true.
People will be able to download. It's because the thing about it is that story does illustrate something about how we can be so seamlessly moved into another world, another reality. Yeah,
and we're going to need a little help. When we get there, we won't be alone. There will be other beings there, humans and others, that'll show us how to live again, in the garden. And peacefully, no money, no sickness, we'll be a lot happier. Okay. Everybody will be happier. There isn't going to be this constant negativity and divisiveness, and, it'll just feel like home, and we will treat each other. Everybody will treat each other like family again. And it's our natural state is to live in a garden. I'm not saying we can't have technology, but honestly, it's not serving us.
Technology is it's a crude simulation of things that we naturally can do. I mean, I grew up with computers. I'm comfortable with them. I also realize at this point that the internet, the interwebs, are a metaphor of connected consciousness. It's hopelessly flawed. It is a terrible system. And we're using toxic microwaves and Wi-Fi's and all of these low energy technologies to be able to communicate, but it is a metaphor for something that we naturally once had, I believe.
Oh, and we'll have it again. Like I said, the web of light is something. You kind of see this depicted in the movie Avatar. Mm-hmm. How they were all right. Yes. They're connected through the planet. I wasn't looking for that story about the portal. It was literally just thrown into my lap, and I was trying to process, like, well, okay, what does this mean? And was I shocked when I realized that the implication of all that was, the first time I saw a picture of a portal, was when I was doing the initial research on Washington, D.C. The gentleman, Wilbur Allen, at UFODC.com, he'd actually taken a picture inadvertently of a wormhole right there by the Capitol.
Is this the guy that puts up cameras all the time and takes all these pictures, and they break his cameras? Okay.
Yep. Well, they didn't just break it. They're doing, it's an energy. That's fairly recent, by the way. Okay. Somebody doesn't want him taking that stuff, and yet he keeps keeping the cameras get repaired, and he puts them up there. If you know anything about the Hutchison effect, that's the kind of energy they're doing. They literally melt down a titanium shutter in a Nikon camera with a titanium housing. Yeah, it's that level of technology.
So he's using pro-grade Nikons.
He is a professional photographer. Okay. He was raised in a family where he had access to this. He's been a professional photographer for many years. Before I met him, before he actually got off on this, he'd worked for ABC News as a technical engineer for about 14 years at the White House and the Capitol building. Uh-huh. And so he knows cameras, he knows electronics intimately, and he knows how to network them. But like I said, he's an interesting guy. If you ever read my books, or specifically the first one, Close Encounters on Capitol Hill, I detail how he was abducted as a child in a military family first in England and then again over here in America, living on base or just outside the base. The Greys abducted him and implanted him and his brother. His brother actually works for the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I don't know how many other people work at the Pentagon that are implanted, but I would suspect it's more than a few.
I would suspect that as well.
Okay, so like I said, I wasn't, I keep saying this, but it's true. I wasn't looking for the story of Washington, D.C. It found me, but I was the only one who pursued it. And a lot of people are scared of it, and they would like to think that I just made it all up, and that's not true at all. This is happening. Mr. Allen is not the only one who's taken these pictures. I have over 1,000 eyewitness accounts from 1850 to the present of people who have seen these things many different walks of life, of, individuals that are credible, sometimes airline pilots and others, police officers. Of course, like I said, the level of denial is something I always was puzzled about until I put the demonic equation. I didn't call it Archon at that time. But when as I was reading about The Exorcist, and there was this boy, right? There's this young boy who's doing things that don't make any sense. And he was hurting himself, he was freaking out his family. And then it correlated in my mind back to Malibu. And I was like, oh my God, please no, this can't, please tell me this is not what I think it is. And then I came to that awareness. It's like, no, it is, it really is. It's the same thing. And that was like the key. It unlocked it. And it all put it into context, or I should say it was the beginning of really putting it into context, but I struggled until I asked for guidance on it. And then, they did, they helped me. And the agreement I think I have served me well is that, I have access to this information as long as I agree to share it without censoring or using it to some personal agenda. It'll keep flowing. And I think it started with a personal curiosity, but it has now become, I guess, a profession. But it's more than that. It's a
mission.
God, I wish you wouldn't use that term, but you're right.
Well, but and I know the words, escape us all. But why does anybody do what they do? Well, some of us are unconsciously very conscious about what it is we're doing. We become aware of what we're doing.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I'm not here alone. I'm not the only one. And
no.
We're all in this together. I've always told people this is not about me. I talk about myself a lot, but it's only as a touchstone, a way of humanizing the bigger picture. I'm using myself as an example of what has happened to mankind and what I've learned along the way. Hopefully, if I share it well, it will assist those who want assistance to get out of this matrix and never have to return to this false way of life.
Well, that actually is why I'm having you on for this interview, and that's actually why I've been trying to sift through all of this information for, 30 years.
Yeah.
Because there has to be meaning in it. Otherwise, it just becomes confusing, and we wind up going to sleep. I mean, the whole idea of soul sleep to me is simply when you become so overwhelmed that you shut down. Well, you have a choice. You can respond to things and recollect yourself and respond to the circumstances around you, or you simply can go numb and go into a state of spiritual catalepsy. And I see that around me so much now that I'm basically panning for gold at this point. and I've got it. I've got a great listener base. I have guests like you that come on that are really filling in the dots, because no one of us has the whole picture, and no one of us can contain all this information.
True enough, but in our current state, we have severe limitations placed on us.
Yeah.
In our natural state, we can process a tremendous amount of information or energy because that's just how we were designed. Especially when we're connected to, think of it this way, you can find out just about anything through the internet these days. But if you're connected to the web of light, you can feel and know things at a distance all across the cosmos. So we're talking trillions of worlds, and all these different intelligent life forms are accessible to us. And all their wisdom, all their experience, all their compassion and love and insight is available to us. Now, that's pretty awesome, okay? Without any kind of censorship whatsoever. As I said, our potential is truly unlimited unless we choose to live in a false construct.
And so what you're doing is basically helping people to map the way right now. I mean, in terms of awakening this consciousness. As we kind of close down the interview here, Robert, what can the people do who hear this information, go to your website, and begin to put these pieces together? What is the most critical thing that people can do right now with this information?
Well, if someone is of like mind, you can share it with them if they haven't heard it before. That's important. But I think individually, know that the time is coming, that the time is short here for this matrix. And I think it's important that we prepare. This is why we're having this public discussion, is to see, because people lack orientation. And as things start to fall apart, it's going to cause a lot of confusion. So individuals who are awake and aware have a responsibility to assist others, those who want assistance to make this transition. It'll be a lot more easier for everyone if we reach out. And I don't mean like preaching to people. I mean just, offering some assistance to them, help them to see the truth if they're struggling and they're open to it. Because here's the thing, as people become more and more uncomfortable in the matrix, as it starts collapsing, they're going to be open. They will be open to hearing this information, the truth. They're going to be looking for answers, okay? And it's not coming from the government or the Vatican or the UN. It just isn't. So it's incumbent upon us to try and do that. That's why shows like this are so important. The mainstream media is not only is it a dinosaur, it's toxic. It's toxic. And so, whatever truth you can share with other people very peacefully, and truthfully, that's important. It really is. I tell people we're a lot more important than we think we are, but not for the reasons, the false reasons that people think, oh, I got money, I got a house, or what. Those things are nothing. That's nothing. Those are. Let's get back to real quick. Remember that the parable about it's easier for a rich man to pass
a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to move into the kingdom of heaven. Yes.
Right. Okay. Because the camel has to kneel down on his knees. It's metaphorically, we're talking about a doorway, a doorway to the city, the kingdom. Let's just call it the kingdom. The camel has to get down on his knees and take everything off of his back before he can get through that portal. And that's sort of a metaphor for who we are. We're carrying all this crap that is just totally insignificant and sort of a burden that we don't even need in order to get through the doorway. Because honestly, everything's going to be provided. Okay? Everything we need to live a healthy life, a very loving, happy, peaceful life is there on the other side of the portal, or these portals to worlds that are essentially paradise or gardens. That's what the word means. This Persian word means a walled garden or biosphere. That's all we're talking about is returning to our natural state.
And a lot of this, I think, when people begin to do the research, and we're going to do more shows on this as well, we'll begin to see that the picture that you're painting is not as unrealistic or as, I guess you would call it, airy-fairy as they might think it is right now, that basically we're sitting at the end of an age, and we have decisions to make about our short-term and our long-term position.
Right.
I think it's a good place to leave it for this interview. Robert Stanley, thank you for coming on to Off Planet Radio and for sharing this information with this audience and with the greater audience that are out there. I know you're busy and you're doing a lot of work right now, and anything we can do to help you, let us know and stay in touch with us.
Will do, Randy. Thanks for having me.
Very good. This has been Off Planet Radio. My guest, Robert Stanley. We'll be back with another show very soon. The truth is out there. It's inside.